There's as many stories or as many conversations as there are grains of sand on the beach. Just an abundant, never-ending well of opportunities here to mine different stories, if you will. That just never ends because we all have different experiences. And if we create the space and ask well-constructive questions, we can really tap into the nuance and the uniqueness of the experiences that we're having. And then what's beautiful in this format when we share it in social media is that, the story of your life or the experience or a conversation you have with someone in your life about the experience you have could be medicine for someone else. And the same thing from them could be medicine for you.
Hey everyone, welcome to LinkedIn Presents Redefining Work podcast. I'm your host, Lars Schmidt. And today we're about to get a masterclass in the power of conversation, storytelling, and a lot more. So I'm thrilled to introduce you all to Topaz Adizes. He is the founder and CEO of The Skin Deep. He is an Emmy Award-winning producer, the author of The 12 Questions for Love, and a lot more. So Adizes, you've done a lot. I don't want to condense your bio and your intro into formal titles. So let me just, first question, what do you want the audience to know about you?
That for the last 11 years, I've been holding the space for over 1,200 conversations between pairs. And I've learned a lot. I bring two people into a room, whether they're best friends, married, exes, or family members, brothers. They sit across from each other and they sit for an hour and they ask each other questions that my team and I present to them. And I've learned a lot. And I think that's a unique place to be in. It's a privilege to witness so many, over 1,200 conversations over 11 years in 10 countries. And I think that gives me a unique data set of, as a source of learning. And that's what I've distilled into the book, which really is a guide, 12 Questions for Love. It's a guide to intimate conversations, to deepen your relationship. And that definitely works in personal relationships, but it also works in the workplace. Because at the end of the day, we spend a lot of time at work, and those work relationships are really important because if you don't succeed in your relationships as a team, then your livelihood could be a threat.
Yeah.
And so just why you listen, what I have to offer here is just what my team and I have learned from witnessing over 1,200 conversations, how to create incredible conversations, cathartic conversations that deepen relationships, make it more fulfilling, make it more resilient.
Where did that come from? Like the idea of creating a forum to bring two people together in an intimate kind of guided conversation. Walk me through the concept of this and how it got its start.
It was a little choppy there. It came from, so on my end. So for me, it started about 11 years ago, and I just had we launched this experience design studio called The Skin Deep, and I didn't know what we were going to do, but I knew what the question was. The question was, how's the emotional experience of being human changing in lieu of all this technology that's happening? And this was in 2013, 14. And that's what I was really interested in exploring. And we did this kind of little experiment. We brought two people into a room, we had them facing each other. We presented questions, but we filmed it with 3 cameras, a wide shot and 2 close-ups.
Yeah.
And the 2 close-ups, when we show you these conversations, we're always showing you both faces at the same time. You're always seeing both the speaker and the listener, the one who asks the questions, the one who answers at the same time. And what we're illuminating there is that what's important is not just the speaker, but it's the listener too. And what's really important is the space between. And that's why the project is called The And.
Yeah.
Because a relationship is not just you or I, us or them. It's you and I, us and them. It's the and that connects us. It's the conjunction. And that's really what I feel is humanity. Humanity is not within us, it's between us.
Yeah.
So how do you cultivate humanity? How do you cultivate that sense of connection? And so this was really an experiment at first to see what we can learn from watching people have conversations and yet reflecting both faces at the same time. And it became a powerful format. And since then it's grown and it's kind of taken a life of its own. But that's really where the impetus was.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll have a link to the YouTube channel in the show notes for the podcast. I definitely recommend you check it out. I mean, they're very powerful, and the power is also just in the rawness and the intimacy that you feel as a viewer, right? And I think obviously you are watching or listening a podcast, which is a conversation between two people. And this is a format many of you have seen and heard before. And it's different. The way, as you described, Topaz, the way you film it, the way you show both perspectives, and it's, just a clean studio. There's no distractions, two humans sharing experiences with each other. I watched one of the episodes with you and your father, actually, and just really enjoyed it. Like, I think even relationships at that level, like we pass each other, we see each other at holidays, we have deep conversations, but oftentimes we may not have the really, really deep conversations until traumatic moments, right? Sickness, loss, big life events, things like that. Mm-hmm. And so, creating a vehicle through which people can have that true kind of intimate exchange is really powerful. I want to go back. I want to kind of rewind the clock for you, because you kind of talked a bit about your interest in humanity and conversation, and you were, a philosophy major in college. You went to Berkeley, you studied that at Oxford as well. Where did that love of kind of human connection and that curiosity around kind of humanity start for you? Like, can you think back to a moment where you're like, okay, this is how I see like my interests unfolding?
I would point out, this is a great question. I would point out to two moments. I remember being a kid, watching Charlie Rose as a kid in that black set, in the dark with just a table talking to whoever guessed. And just always remember thinking that was a really cool job. Just asking questions of people. Another time is I remember watching American Beauty. I don't know if you remember that film.
Yeah.
And there's a scene where the character brings the daughter, like there kind of a little love story there, and he brings the daughter and he shows her this videotape that he videos everything, and he shows this bag floating in the air, just like how the magic of life is dancing in the air with this bag. And I was I was 21 at the time, and that was just as I was graduating university, and I ended up, long story short, after like working and failed startup, I just went traveling. I took a camera, and like I think a kind of combination of this curiosity of talking to people as a kid that I had, along with using the camera to document the magic that exists in life, was kind of what set me off on that journey. And I just took the camera, I just started traveling. I went to Australia and India, and just was talking to people, and I realized the camera was a bridge. The camera was a door opener. The camera created the context by which could kind of justify me asking questions, especially the strangers. And that was incredibly powerful for me. That's kind of, I think, what set me off to then pursue filmmaking as a film director. Just because I saw, wow, this camera is a door opener. It's a bridge. It's a connector. And I think that's where some of the curiosity came from for me. I remember that. I think someone asked me yesterday, like, is everybody curious or not? And what I thought was, not all of us are curious, or maybe we are curious, but only about certain things. Some people are curious about food, some about sports, some about building, carpentry. I'm curious about people and people's lives. I find that really interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's something we share in common. But my first podcast, I came up obviously through the kind of HR and recruiting and talent space. And so, as a recruiter, I'm having conversations with, hundreds of people every year. And the first podcast I created was called The Best Part of Your Job. And that was always my favorite interview question. What is the best part of your job? Because it was so illuminating to what somebody's drivers are, their motivations, what they like, what they don't like. And it really helped me gauge, like, are you going to find that here? Or where might be the gaps between like what your ideal role is and what I might be, representing? And in that podcast, like I just reached out to my network and I said, I just want to talk to interesting people with interesting jobs. And that led me to conversations with, the guy who played Chunk from the Goonies, music producers, shark marine biologists, an old high school friend who was a Marine Corps officer in Afghanistan and Iraq, and kind of talked about being under fire and just that experience. And it was so fascinating to me. I mean, really, it was just it was a selfish indulgence, right? I wanted to have these conversations. I wanted to learn more about what different careers did and what that experience was like. But it was probably one of the most fun, kind of media projects that I've been involved in, because it helped me just understand different perspectives and life experiences in a different way. And I think that in the content you're producing and kind of the work you're doing with Skin Deep, it also gives you that window into, like, less from a professional standpoint, although some may also cross over to that, but more of just from a personal standpoint, like that rawness and that realness, particularly in the age of social media, where we're often getting people's highlight reels and like carefully curated, pictures into their world. When you think back, I mean, 1,200 conversations is a lot. Like, are there some, when you look back and you say to yourself, like, you still think about now, like whether it was the topic, whether it was a moment of exchange between two individuals, like when you look back on the body of work, are there particular moments that still really stand out to you?
Yeah. And I hesitate there only because it's almost like picking between your children.
Yeah.
You love them all. Maybe you have some slight favorites that are closer in here, but they're all. And what's amazing about this project, and that always humbles me, is that there's as many stories or as many conversations as there are grains of sand on the beach. Just an abundant, never-ending well of opportunities here to mine different stories, if you will. That just never ends, because we all have different experiences. And if we create the space and ask well-constructed questions, we can really tap into the nuance and the uniqueness of the experiences that we're having. And then what's beautiful in this format, when we share it in social media, is that, the story of your life, or the experience or conversation you have with someone in your life about the experience you have, could be medicine for someone else.
Yeah.
And the same thing from them could be medicine for you. And it's an incredible resource for us to tap into. And I'm always just humbled by sitting in the room going, I can't believe that, this is kind of weird. There's three people in a room filming two people talking, and we're not moving. And it's like an hour, 10-minute therapy session where the therapy is the questions and the space is theirs. And we're just sitting there making sure the cameras don't stop to roll. Yeah. And it's just an incredible experiment of just allowing humans to be humans. And when we take the time to do that, incredible things come up, and people say incredibly profound things that are true and resonate, regardless of their background or their own experiences, that resonate with my own experiences, or the camera persons, or the wider audience that watches on YouTube or TikTok, Instagram. It resonates with them. And I think for me, I love them all. Of course, there's a few moments that really stick out with me. There's Marcella and Rock, which was early on as a couple. It went to Sundance. It premiered on the New Yorker digital channel. And there's a moment where after 10, 15 minutes, he says something like, are you proud of me? She's like, I'm proud of you. And he goes, and then he says something about like what you've done, where you've been. And he just takes a deep breath. He's like, I've been faithfully nonviolent for the last 10 years. And I'm going, what? Like, faithfully nonviolent? Where did that come from? Wait, who?
Right.
What? Total surprise, unexpected. And then that opens up this incredible conversation between them. His background was he was in solitary, and he was even in death row for a while. He was sentenced to be executed. And, I actually don't know the details, but got out. They've been on the end a number of times. It's an incredibly powerful conversation. And I think it's a great example of learning something from different parts of experiences that you don't have the ability to tap into. I mean, like we just did a collaboration with a pharmaceutical company where we explored stories of HIV. Mm-hmm. And we're filming in Durham, North Carolina, where we had a transgender individual speaking to a healthcare practitioner. And they were having a conversation at the end. We always check in with the crew at the end of the day because it could be pretty heavy. You're sitting through 5, 6, 7 conversations, almost like therapy. And my DP just said, my director of photography said, I'm just really honored, because where else would I get access to that conversation? I'm a white heterosexual male, cisgender. Like, where else would I get that kind of to be able to witness and hear that community's experience. That was incredibly humbling and such, and I think that's wonderful. It's like, how do we create the spaces for us to learn from each other?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, you touched on something there as well in your answer that I think, certainly resonated with me is the ability to see yourself and your own life experiences and feel less alone in them through story and through narrative and through hearing other people that have experienced similar things. And there's such a power in that. I think especially because of the fact that, your series goes so deep and it is so intimate. It's not just covering, superficial, high-level things. I mean, it goes really deep. The kind of things that we don't typically talk about openly or on social media. And I want to get tactical for a moment for audience, because you've been a part of not just observing so many conversations, but also architecting them through the questions and the prompts that you give the participants. When it comes to questions that really help build connection, and I wouldn't even say intimacy at first, because I'll maybe use this more in like a work context. Yeah. But you're a new leader coming into a role. You're having one-on-one meetings with your team. Maybe it's the first time you're meeting them. Sure, you're going to talk about some work stuff, but you're also going to talk about some personal stuff to get to know each other. And what recommendations do you have around specific kind of questions or prompts to help build kind of trust and connection in new relationships in a work context?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, bottom line, it comes down to two things. A, the space you create, and B, well-constructed questions. So if you're coming into a new job and you want to get to know your team, part of creating the space would be, for instance, we have a team building deck and we have a coworkers deck. It's a game. We make it a game. It's 200 questions in a box. Great. The act of randomly pulling out a question versus you as the leader asking a question are two different spaces. Why? If you as the leader ask a question, the team is not necessarily wondering about the question. They're wondering, why is this your first question? Why is this your second question? What do you want to hear? Now they're playing with their mind, which is built to protect. So they're playing politics. Obviously, they want to keep their jobs or get a raise or who knows what, move up the ladder. So if you ask the question, which is fair enough, that happens a lot, then just be aware that you are contending also with them wondering why you're asking the question. So you'd want them to know where you're coming from. So set the intention.
Yeah.
So in creating the space, you want to set the intention. And the intention is different than the agenda. And I don't mean by agenda, we're going to hit these what we're going to talk about in this meeting. I'm talking about agenda in terms of your agenda, where you want to end up. So articulate the intention. Hey, I'm here, I'm new. I want to have an exploratory talk. As soon as you say exploratory talk, you're letting them know, you're making it clear what's permissible in this space.
Yeah.
Because look, we don't sleep in the kitchen and we don't cook in the bedroom. We have certain spaces where certain actions are permissible and are supported. Are you making it clear what room you are in the current meeting of your workspace? This is an exploratory talk. Feel free. Or no, this is a data. I don't want analysis. I need information. I just want specific info. Make it clear what is the intention of that meeting. That's a great way to deflate their coming out with their minds, trying to figure out what answer you want to hear. So when we have a card game, for instance, that automatically creates a space. Why? You say, hey, we have 200 questions here. They're random. We're just going to play the game. Oh, a game? That's fun. Okay, randomly choose out a question. What should we be doing that we're not? What's one value we do not share with our clients? Where are we being efficient while being ineffective? Or where are we being effective but not being efficient? What are signs of a successful team, in your opinion? What is the elephant in the room that we should be talking about and are not? You ask it that question, and if it's random and it's not coming from someone that they sense has an agenda, you're giving permission for it to be more open. And that's an easier way to collect information and invite people to really offer their full selves. Because obviously there's a power dynamic always in the workplace.
Yeah.
And one great way to deflate that is just to acknowledge it, and let them know where you're coming from. My intention is I really want to hear everything. And so either we're going to ask questions, or why don't each of us write a question that you think is important to ask. we'll put it into a bowl and we'll just put them out randomly one at a time and answer them.
Yeah. I want to kind of, pull the thread on that last comment a little bit more. So, maybe we'll kind of frame this in the context of a new leader is getting their team together for the first time, right? And maybe obviously some of the people on the team will know each other. They all have some history, relationships, etc. The leader doesn't. They're fresh. They're kind of coming in, and they're like, I really like your point around setting the intention around that discussion and the framing. So like now we're going to talk about data. Now we're going to talk about, I want to get to know you, more as a person. And I think sometimes in this kind of, we get lost in this notion of, bringing your whole self to work. And, I think some leaders can come in with good intentions, but they will just move from one to the other. And it's like the context switching that's required.
Well, what do you mean? What do you mean they're moving from one to the other? What do you mean by that?
So maybe they'll say, let's talk specifically about this deliverable for this client. Okay, let's talk about, blockers that we have to overcome for that. That's okay. Hey, what'd you do this weekend? Okay, the come back to this. And so I think the not framing and setting context for the discussion, obviously that was a very superficial, what'd you do this weekend? That's small talk throwaway. But the idea is like, they're not, I think many leaders are not thinking about maybe setting the context through which they're having these conversations, which I really liked your point around how to frame that. If you're in that setting where now it's maybe an offsite and the leader wants to come in and kind of create a platform, like the goal of the offsite is more around connection, team building, trust, than it is like, what is our strategic roadmap for the next 9 months?
Yeah.
How would you recommend them to approach a meeting and an offsite like that?
Well, first of all, the fact that you're going to an offsite, you're going to have a different conversation in an offsite than you are in a corporate conference room.
Yeah.
Right? There's just the space you're in, both physically, but also even in the Zoom room when you articulate your intention, sets the tone for what's permissible. What is the permissible behavior here? What is the expectations? And that instantly makes people feel like, okay, I get it. This is the best way for me to contribute here.
Yeah.
So being aware of the physical space is great because you will have a different conversation in the evening around the fireplace than you will in a fully lit boardroom.
Yeah.
There's a different, and then the questions are, let's just be fully, all the power is in the question. All the power is in the question. So are you going to share some of that power with the people around? That doesn't necessarily mean you're sharing the authority. It's clear who has the authority because you're responsible to make the final decisions. But sharing the power in terms of creating the questions. Because sometimes oftentimes we're racing to answer the right answer to the wrong question.
Yeah.
Focus more on the question. And sometimes the best questions can come from the people who are more directly in line with the client or the service or the product or the marketing. So how do you share that? So one way is maybe you create a space where you ask one question, but everyone else gets asked a question. And then the order in which we ask those questions, make it random. Like giving a little bit of space to the randomness takes away from the sense that there's an agenda you want to achieve. Right? And if you're talking about creating, look, in my opinion, in my team, we have 5 kinds of meetings. And we let everyone know at the beginning what kind of meeting it is. And sometimes you'll swap for one meeting at the half-hour mark. You say, great, now we're moving to the second meeting. So one kind of meeting is, data analysis collection. I'm here, I want to figure out what this thing is. How does this work? What's been happening? So I'm going to ask a bunch of questions and get a bunch of answers. So don't be offended if I'm not asking for your ideas, because right now I'm collecting information.
Yeah.
So people go, oh, okay, cool. They're just collecting information. I'm here to serve by giving the answers to the questions this person asked. Okay, cool. Then I know why they're asking. Then you have another kind of meeting, which is brainstorming. This is where we are brainstorming about ideas. And that's like, okay, so we're going to brainstorm and we're not going to come up with a decision at the end of the meeting. So don't be upset don't feel we're wasting our time for an hour because we don't come out with a decision. That's not the intention of the meeting. The intention here is brainstorming. It has a different energy. It's yes and.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you might have, then you have another meeting where it's like, this is an execution meeting. We're deciding what we're doing, who's going to do it, how, by when, what exactly are they doing? So don't be offended that you're not giving ideas. This is about figuring out who's doing what by when, how, right? And the last kind of meeting is just a social one. Like this is a social meeting for us to connect. So being clear about what kind of meeting it is really helpful in allowing people to understand what the expectations are. Because one person might come to a meeting and just love giving ideas, while the other room's in a meeting going, you know what, I'm so sick of these ideas because we never come out with any solutions and things. But if you tell people this is what the meeting's about, they understand. And they can best serve the function, the intention of the meeting that you've set. That's helpful.
I mean, that is helpful. And I think, again, you kind of set a tone going into the meeting of exactly what the expected output of the meeting is. And it's not always, again, like the brainstorm idea. You're right. I think too many times we go into those meetings and we're like, okay, we have to, get on a whiteboard and throw all these ideas out there. And then we have to end up with something. We have to end up with a direction, with an idea, with something that we're going to do. And I think that restriction stifles the creativity and imagination that may happen in that meeting, because you may be thinking, okay, well, this will never be something that will be picked. So I'm just not even going to suggest it.
Right. And even there's like, I know this is a bad idea, but I'm going to throw it out there. Why? Because my bad idea might be the thread upon you that you pull on to create a great idea.
Yeah.
And it's a yes and environment. And then you say, listen, even in the one meeting, you're like, okay, you know what? We're done with the brainstorming. We're taking a 5-minute piss break, or we are just going to ring this bell and we are marketing now that we're moving into, now we're going to make a decision.
Yeah.
So everyone clearly understands, okay, the brainstorming, the ideas, yes and energy is over. And now we're going to discuss about making decisions, and they shift it to the next thing. Oftentimes I like to separate them by a night so that you can brainstorm and create, and till up the earth, if you will, and then come back the next day to discuss because other ideas may come overnight.
Yeah.
Right. But just making clear. And then I think what's also important as a leader is you have to remember that you set the tone. You are priming your whole team. And a very clear way that I've learned this when I was making films was when I would make a documentary film and I would interview someone. The interviewee is a direct reflection of the interviewer. So if I'm looking at my interviewee and I'm asking them questions and I realize that they're nervous, I don't tell them to calm down or relax. That just makes them more nervous. What I do is I'll do something that loosens up the room. I'll take a deep breath. Sometimes I'll just curse. I'll say something. I'll use the S word as just to break the ice and allow them, hey, informal here. And that's the great way to signal to them what is permissible actions in this space. And you as a leader, they're all looking at you. The power dynamics are clear. So that's why sometimes you hear like, all right, let's start a meeting, and you take the vulnerable step first and you be vulnerable. But at this point, people know that that's a play, and that's fair enough. It works. But I think what's important is to be aware that the questions frame the answers. So what questions are you asking? Who's asking them? And how are you responding? And in your response, you're priming your team to answer in similar ways.
Yeah. I want to continue with vulnerability for a moment, because I think, as you mentioned, like that's a play that's kind of understood. And I think that our thinking, our collective thinking around, leadership has evolved a lot over the last, 5-10 years, where vulnerability, authenticity, I think those things are kind of ratcheted up as higher level skills and success markers, I think, for a lot of leaders. But I'd love to get your perspective on vulnerability specifically, because I think that is such an interesting thing where, I personally agree, I personally embrace vulnerability as a leader, as a human. I think it's part of what makes me and allows me to build some connections. But I think in particular in the world of work, we lean on that so much as a success marker. And I think for those of us that are comfortable being open and being vulnerable, it allows us to be more ourselves. And I think that obviously is an enhancer to us. But there are a lot of people who, for whatever reason, may not be comfortable being as open, being as vulnerable. And I think particularly for leaders that may show up in that way, the idea of vulnerability can be difficult, to them. And I'm curious, obviously, with the conversations you've had, like, how do you think about that? If you're talking to somebody who maybe feels that way, what advice would you share?
Yeah, great question. I've been thinking about this a lot. I think one thing that we often overlook in terms of vulnerability is when you say the word vulnerability, you think, oh, the leader needs to be vulnerable in their conversation. They got to share what happened to them this weekend that was vulnerable, and then everyone else knows it's okay to share. We often miss the flip side. To be the listener can also be a vulnerable act. If you were a leader and you said, okay, I'm going to go around the room and I want each of you to tell me what's one thing I could improve on, and you have to listen to that and take that constructive criticism, that's a vulnerable act.
Yeah.
So it's not just about sharing your own vulnerability. It's taking the feedback from others that makes you vulnerable without overreacting or being defensive. That act alone creates a tone of vulnerability because you're being vulnerable in that you're accepting this feedback, right? And then the other thing is clear demarcation, because one challenge, demarcating the boundaries. Look, we're at work, it's not therapy session. We're not going to work for therapy. We're going to work as a cohesive team to accomplish our goals so that we can ultimately make the world better, make our market better, and really support our families and the passions of our families and the needs of our family at the end of the day, right? Put food on the table, send your kids to school, take care of health needs, support their passions, right? If it's all a therapy session, are we going to be more successful at that? If we're going to be vulnerable, is it going to make us more successful at that? The answer to me is yes, but you need clear demarcation. You got to make clear like, hey, this is not therapy sessions, but we do need to create the space because we're all humans to share what we're experiencing. So for example, in my team, we have a thing we call venting, right? Where if somebody starts complaining about something, you just highlight, hey, are you venting? Because sometimes you got to let that stuff out. But and like, oh yeah, I'm venting. You're like, cool. And then everyone knows they have 2 minutes. And once that 2 minutes is up, it's like, we're done venting. Now we're talking about what we're doing about it. Right? Or if you know you're venting, you're like, hey guys, I'm venting. Okay, boom, boundary, clear. I'm venting. I'm going to let this out. Everyone knows it's 2 minutes. We're going to let them vent. Then we're going to move on. But we clearly have a mark. After 2 minutes, we're moving on. And if someone is venting, but they're not aware of it, we call it out.
Yeah.
So this way it enables you, like, I have a free space. Like, because look, if you had a bad day, putting your kid to school or something, as your dad is sick, it's really hard to be focused at work. And we got to allow that space because it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And we're not machines. And the AIs are going to crush us if we're just machines. That's, we don't know. Now the impetus is on the differences between us. How we're feeling in different ways. That's where the opportunities lie. How do we communicate in a way that unearths those differences, because that's where the opportunities lie. So by making clear demarcations, clear language of like, hey, okay, being human, this is where I'm at, but there's a clear mark of like, that's over, now we're working about the solution.
Yeah, I wanna kind of come back. Obviously we made it however many minutes in this episode before AI came up, but it was bound to come up at some point. And I want to spend a bit of time with it in a minute, because I think you have such an interesting perspective as a creator, as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, as things that are deeply rooted in humanity, but also technology. And we are in the early stages of this new wave of generative AI where, the work of creatives is starting to be, absorbed in AI in terms of AI capabilities. In this context, I was at an event at Google's headquarters during Tech Week in Los Angeles a few weeks ago, and there's a fascinating panel of musicians and artists talking about like their as creatives, like how their perspective on AI had evolved. Where first it was like, oh, it's evil, it's bad, it's not doing human things, to like now they're using tools and allows them to workshop ideas in a much quicker way. And I'd just love to get your perspective as somebody who, kind of works in a variety of, categories, if you will, that, AI is becoming a part of to some extent. How do you think about AI? How do you use AI? And how does the kind of the growth and adoption of AI shape how you may think about your work, if it does at all?
Yeah, great. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about it. And where I'm at now is just our business structures were focused on time. You would hire 5 people because you could only have 24 hours in a day. Maybe 16 or 18 max was working hours. So you needed to get more done in a day. So you would pay 5 other humans to give you 16 hours of their day, and you'd have this many more hours a week, right? Because time was finite.
Yeah.
Soon you're going to have AI going to do these executive cognitive functions to get things done at a cheaper price, and you're not going to have to be worried about the emotions or the situation of the AI. So now the impetus for us humans is actually in our differences. Why? Because AI learns ubiquitously at the same time. One node learns something, the whole system learns. And we humans do not operate that way at all. It's actually totally different. We learn at different rates. We see things totally different. We give different words to the same thing. We have same words to different things. And we're learning at different rates. We see things at different rates. We're totally the opposite spectrum of AI. And whereas in the past, you needed more time, that's why you had humans. In the future, you want more time, you got AI, you got robots. So then does that leave us humans? It actually leaves us in our differences. And so the question is, can we increase our capability to explore our differences? Because that's where we can find the golden nuggets, the opportunities that AI doesn't see, right? And that's where I see the place of us. But yet, how do we cultivate that? It's in our conversations. It's our ability to sit in discomfort in safe spaces. Let us not confuse safety and comfort, safety and discomfort. You can be safe and uncomfortable. Don't think that because you're uncomfortable, you're not safe, right? How do you sit in that discomfort and find out where the golden opportunities are? Because we're all learning at different rates. We're all communicating in different manners. And that's where the opportunity lies. And now it's really putting the impetus on us to explore what makes us human and where the humanity lies.
Yeah. Well, I want to, final question for you, and I want to just kind of spend a moment with understanding each other's differences. And I think, we're recording this at a time of massive polarity in the U.S. certainly, where I know you're no longer based here, but there's global ramifications, and this isn't just a U.S. phenomenon. This is a global phenomenon where we do tend to be more polarized. We're getting information from closed sources that are just reinforcing our views and opinions, and frankly, strengthening, pouring rocket fuel on our perceived differences as humans. How do you think about our ability to connect with those? I think that there's this inertia around pushing us into likeness, into pushing us into people who share our views and our mindsets and our thoughts, and that will only exacerbate this problem. We've got to find a way to be able to have a deeper understanding of our differences. How do we get there? I know that's I'm not looking for you to solve
I got it.
global challenges, but you're uniquely positioned to answer. So
I got it for you. In my opinion, there's one word, and the word's coming up. Before the word comes up, it's a reminder. You get good at what you practice.
Yeah.
So what are you practicing? Listening. We're not practicing listening. That's the key. Listening. If you look at all the media that you get, it's people telling you stuff, yelling at you, telling you stuff, reinforcing your opinions. Very little of it is actually the practice of listening. And if you go and watch our content, what you'll see is not only are two people listening to each other and having a conversation, but you're listening to that. What are you practicing? Are you practicing listening? Not hearing something and engaging with your mind. I'm talking about listening and feeling where the other person comes from. That is a practice that we need to deepen in the space that we're at. That to me, it's one word. It's listening and being aware of that. You get good at what you practice. What are you practicing? And key is, how are you practicing listening? Or are you just practicing speaking to the choir or singing with the choir? Where are you practicing listening? What content are you watching that reinforces your practice of listening?
Yeah. Well, Topaz, you shared so many just really powerful examples and lessons, I think, for the audience. If people want to connect with your work after the episode, what's the best way? I know you mentioned YouTube, TikTok. What links can we share with our audience to deeper connect with your work?
So for all our products in the book, it's all on Amazon and also at theskindeep.com. So we have a co-working deck, and we have an and at work bundle, which is team building and on racism and co-workers deck. We have toolkits available. And then personally for speaking engagements and live events, you can go to topazadizes.com. But yeah, all social media is the Skin Deep, and that's where you can find us.
All right. Well, Topaz, man, I really enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate you making time, and thanks for the important work you're doing.
Thank you, Lars. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.